Hello, editing Anastasia here. I have realised that throughout the video I have said Aesir and give it a soft S instead of Aesir. Should be more like a Z. So I've said it wrong through the whole video. Please excuse that. Don't let it bother you. That's all I wanted to say. I hope you enjoyed the video. So let's just let Pastor Anastasia talk you through it. Hello my puddings, welcome to today's video. We are in my kitchen because it is quieter on the side of the building. You can hear some birds, so I hope that that just kind of adds to the ambience. Today I thought we would do a mythology themed video and we could focus on some Norse gods. I've been watching Vikings. I've got into it very late, years after it first aired. So I'm pretty obsessed, needless to say, with Vikings and Norse mythology and Scandinavia. And I've always been interested in that. I think it's a very interesting history. But right now I'm like fully into it. So I thought we could go over 15 major Norse gods and goddesses. I've got my information from a site called realmofhistory.com. So I will link to the webpage that I'm viewing below, so you can go and check it out. The site's actually really cool for mythology things. I've got some Celtic mythology information from here before. So I'm just going to read from the webpage itself. And kind of there's like a preamble to the actual list of the gods and goddesses and their family tree. So I'll just read that as well. So let's start. Okay, so of some of the renowned mythologies from history, the Norse gods and legends probably have one of the vaguest of origins, with their primary lore borrowed from a patchwork of oral traditions and local tales that were conceived in both pre-Christian ancient Germania and early medieval Scandinavia. Many of these varied parcels of old fable were collected and compiled in manuscripts comprising Old Norse texts in circa 13th century in Iceland. One of these important Old Norse works of literature pertains to the prose Edda, assumed to be written by the Icelandic scholar and historian Snorri Sturluson, circa 1220 AD. The other crucial literary work composed in Old Norse relates to the poetic Edda. As its name suggests, the compilation consists of poems dating from circa 1000 to 1300 AD, with most of its collections and these variant versions containing text from Codex Regius, Royal Book, an Icelandic medieval manuscript dating from circa 1270 AD. The Codex Regius in itself is considered as one of the most important extant sources for both Norse mythology and Germanic legends. One of the best examples of these medieval influence on Norse mythology relates to the narrative of Aesir Vanir War, whereby two different pantheons representing the Aesir and Vanir tribes of Norse gods are merged into a singular literary scope. So without further ado, let's take a gander to 15 major Norse gods and goddesses you should know about. Okay, so number 1 is Emir, the ancestor of giants. Like with most mythologies, including Mesopotamian and Egyptian, the Norse pantheon had its primeval entity in the form of Emir, the ancestor of all the Jotnar mythic entities that ranged from giants to other fantastical creatures. Now, as opposed to a strict categorization as one of the Norse gods, Emir was perceived more as the first being, who was created by the ice of Niflheim, combined with the heat of Muspelheim, long before the existence of the earth. And after his own genesis, Emir, with his hermaphroditic body, was responsible for birthing male, female, and other mythical beings who in turn would go on to bear future generations. And mirroring other primeval deities of ancient mythologies, the narrative of Emir took a turn, with the entity being given a tragic ending due to his apparent evil machinations. To that end, Buri, created after Emir, often acknowledged as the first of the Norse gods, had a son named Bor, who finally married one of Emir's descendants, Bestla, and their union produced 3 sons, Vi, Vili, and Odin. But the angry Emir confronted these ascending young Norse gods, which eventually led to his own death at the hands of the 3 brothers. The 3 Norse gods, including Odin, then proceeded on to create the entire earth, much like the Mesopotamian Marduk. From Emir's fallen body, with his blood accounting for the seas and oceans, while his bones made up the rocks and mountains. Furthermore, his hair was used for the trees, his skull was transformed into the sky and heavens, and his brains were made into clouds. And finally, his eyebrows were fashioned into the Midgard, the middle realm of mankind. Odin, the king of the Aesir gods. Odin, possibly the most revered yet enigmatic of all Norse gods, was regarded as the king of Aesir tribe of gods. Historically, Odin has always been prominent in the pantheon of Germanic mythology, as is evident from Tacitus's late 1st century AD work Germania, where Odin is seen as the equivalent of Roman god Mercury. And given his mythical eminence over the cultural framework of the Germanic people, Odin was associated with various and often antithetical aspects ranging from wisdom, healing, royalty to death, sorcery, and even frenzy. Pertaining to the attribute of wisdom, the character of Odin, mirroring his contradictory aspects, was often portrayed as the haggard wanderer who relentlessly seeks knowledge, in spite of his regal status as the ruler of the Asgard. One of the stories epitomizes the god's thirst for knowledge and wisdom, where Odin willingly gouges out one of his eyes as a sacrifice for Mimir, a shadowy being who possesses unparalleled knowledge because of its consumption of the water from the well of Erd. Mimir, in return, offers Odin a draught from the well that draws from the roots of the Yggdrasil, the cosmic tree that binds the 9 worlds of Norse mythology. On the other hand, the one-eyed Odin also has a sinister, albeit in a nascent level, side to him, given the entity's proclivity for provocation that leads to conflicts and wars. Essentially, when perceived as a war god, Odin was seen as the epitome of battle frenzy and chaos, aspects that were favoured by the warlords and berserkers. In any case, in our modern-day context, the name of Odin is related to Wednesday, since the word is derived from Woden's Day, with Odin being referred to as Woden in Old English and Woden in Old High German. Freyk, the queen of Aesir gods. Possibly the foremost of all Norse goddesses when it came to their pantheon, Freyk was regarded as the queen of Aesir and the goddess of the sky. Moreover, with her special status as the spouse of Odin, the deity, with her power of foreknowledge, was also frequently associated with fertility, household, motherhood, marriage, and even domestic matters. In essence, of all the Norse gods, it was the mythic aspects of Frigg that were mostly related to the perceived bliss of family life. On the other hand, Frigg's love for family and motherly protectiveness also leads to the tragic episode of her favoured child Baldur's death. Interestingly enough, in spite of Frigg's eminence in later Norse mythology during the Viking period, her Old Germanic version is steeped in mystery, a factor that is still debated in the academic world. Pertaining to the latter, according to one of the origin-based hypotheses, Frigg was possibly identified with the goddess Freya, who is discussed later in this article, during the Proto-Germanic period, but as scholar Stephen Grundy mentioned in his book The Concept of Goddesses, the problem of whether Frigg or Freya may have been a single goddess originally is a difficult one, made more so by the scantiness of pre-Viking Age references to Germanic goddesses and the diverse quality of the source. The best that can be done is to survey the arguments for and against their identity and see how well they can each be supported. Thor, the loyal defender of Asgard. Arguably the most famous of the Norse gods, Thor, although I think it's supposed to be pronounced Tor, the god of thunder, with his burly might and boisterous ways, epitomized the formidable warrior who was accorded high status in the Germanic society of ancient and early medieval times. Regarded as the son of Odin and his wife Freyr, not to be confused with Freyk, Thor, with his red beard and eyes, was hailed as the loyal and stalwart defender of the Aesir's stronghold of Asgard, thus suggesting his symbolic role as the protector of the ordered cosmos. Suffice to say, according to the poetic Edda, Thor was considered as the strongest of all beings among both gods and men, and his strength was rather amplified by some of his specifically crafted apparels, including his iron gloves and the belt of Njord. But the most common item associated with Thor undoubtedly pertains to the dwarf-crafted hammer Mjolnir, thus alluding to how thunder was perceived by the pre-Christianity era Norsemen, as a result of Thor striking his hammer, presumably when slaying giants and monsters, while riding his chariot drawn by two giant goats, Tanjost and Tangrisnir. Interestingly enough, Thor was also regarded as the god of agriculture, fertility, and hallowing. Pertaining to the former, this aspect was probably an extension of Thor's role as a sky god, who was also responsible for rain. To that end, Thor's wife, Sif, and her golden hair possibly symbolized the fields of grain, and thus their union embodied the fruitfulness and verdancy of the lands. As for our modern context, Thursday is derived from the Old English Thursday, a contraction possibly influenced by Old Norse, which literally means Thor's Day. Balder, the god of light and purity. Regarded as the Aesir god of light and purity, Balder, the younger son of Odin and Freyk and half-brother of Thor, epitomized the engulfment sun itself. He was also hailed as a fair, wise, and gracious divine being, whose beauty even abashed the elegant flowers before him, matching his physical attributes. His abode, Breidablik, in Asgard, was considered the most exquisite of all halls in the stronghold of the Norse gods, flaunting its gilded silver components and embellished pillars that only allowed the purest of hearts to enter. Snorri Sturluson wrote, "There is nothing but good to be told of him. He is the best of them, and everyone sings his praises. He is so fair to face and bright that a splendour radiates from him, and there is a flower so white that it is likened to Balder's brow. It is the whitest of all flowers. From that you can tell how beautiful his body is and how bright his hair. He is the wisest of gods and the sweetest spoken and the most merciful, but it is characteristic of his that once he has pronounced a judgment, it can never be altered." Balder also possessed the greatest ship ever built, Hringhorni, which was later used as the funeral pyre after the god's tragic death. Relating to this deplorable incident, Balder was mistakenly killed by Hoder, Balder's twin brother, who was also blind. Hoder was presented a dart made of mistletoe by the cunning Loki, who knew that Balder was impervious to all living elements on the face of Asgard and Midgard, except for the seemingly harmless mistletoe, which Frigg, Balder's mother, missed when making a plea to most living things when it came to causing no harm to her delicate son. So the dart, thrown jokingly at Balder, as was the habit among the Norse gods, directly pierced his heart and slew him, instead of bouncing off the god. Consequently, many of the grief-stricken Norse gods even tried to bring Balder back from the domain of hell, but to no avail, and thus the wise god was lost to them on account of Loki's cruel prank. Vidar, the silent god of vengeance. Represented as the silent god of vengeance, Vidar, or Vidar in Old Norse, possibly translated to wide ruler, was the son of Odin and the Jotun Grid. With his name attested in the poetic Edda, his association with vengeance probably stems from the foretelling of how he would avenge his father, Odin, his death by killing the ferocious Fenrir, the monstrous wolf at the Ragnarok. Incredibly enough, he is also counted among the very few major Norse gods who would survive the final conflict, and thereafter dwell on the field of Idefjord. In Gylfaginning, first part of the poetic Edda, Vidar is mentioned to wear a thick shoe, like Thor, which is constantly mended by the god himself. This is because the shoe would keep Vidar relatively safe as he plunges his foot down Finrar's throat to smash the monster's heart at the Ragnarok. Although Voluspa mentions how Vidar would slay Fenrir by thrusting his sword into the wolf's heart. To that end, there might have been a tradition among the Norse shoemakers to keep, or delicate, little scraps of leather from the trimmings of their shoes to aid the silent god of vengeance. As for his attribute of silence, it might have to do with the ritual of vengeance which subjected warriors to periods of silence, possibly as a means of focusing or as part of the rites of purification. In that regard, Vidar was said to be almost as strong as Thor, but bereft to the boisterous nature of his renowned half-brother. Interestingly enough, in terms of etymology and history, Georges Dumézil hypothesized how the figure of Vidar evolved from an Indo-European cosmic entity related to spatial scopes, much like Vishnu from the Hindu mythology. Tyr, the god of war. I'm not sure if it's Tyr or Tyr. The deity of war and heroic glory, Tyr, was regarded as the bravest of the Norse gods of the Germanic people, and in spite of his association with wars, more specifically the formalities of conflict, including treaties, his origins are rather enigmatic, with the deity possibly being one of the oldest and most important of the ancient Germanic pantheon, until he was supplanted by Odin, who had been described as many myths as Tyr's father, while other stories place Tyr as the son of the giant Hrimir. In any case, since some of the aspects of Tyr related to formalities, the god was also hailed as the deity of justice and oaths. Tyr was often depicted as the one-handed god, since his limb was bitten off by the monstrous wolf Fenrir when the god tried to trap the creature, and Fenrir was thus successfully bound till Ragnarok due to the sacrifice of Tyr. In spite of this episode, Tyr is foretold to be slain by Garm, the guard dog of hell, as opposed to Fenrir, according to the prose version of Ragnarok. And like some other Norse gods, Tyr also had a significance in our modern day context. In that regard, the Old English variant of his name is T-I-W, and he was associated with Mars by the Romans, and thus Dies Marty, Mars Day, came to known as Tuesday. Bragi, the bard god of Asgard. Bragi, which roughly translates to poet in Old Norse, often considered as the skaldic god of poetry in Norse mythology, pertains to a unique mythical character who possibly shared traits with the historical 9th century bard Bragi Bodisson, who himself might have served in the courts of Ragnar Lodbrok and Bjorn at Hague. In any case, when it came to legends, the god Bragi was perceived as the bard of Valhalla, the magnificent hall of Odin, where all of the fallen heroes and warriors are gathered for the ultimate showdown at Ragnarok. To that end, Bragi was hailed as the skillful poet god who sang and dedicated the hordes of the Einjar, warriors who died in battles and were brought to Odin's majestic hall by the Valkyries. Snorri Sturluson wrote, "One is called Bragi. He is renowned for wisdom and most of all for fluency of speech and skill with words. He knows most of scholarship, and after him scholarship is called Bragger. And from his name, that one is called Bragger, man or woman, who possesses eloquence surpassing others of women or men. His wife is Idun, who is the Norse goddess associated with apples and youth." As for the Norse gods' historical counterparts, there are few candidates other than Bragi Bodisson mentioned in various poetic Edda pieces. The names include Bragi, son of Halfdan the Old, and Bragi Hognesson, mentioned in the second part of Helga Vida Hundingsbana. Idun, the youthful goddess of rejuvenation. Idun belonged to the Aesir tribes of Norse gods, and as such was considered as the Norse goddess of eternal youthfulness. This aspect was represented by her strikingly exuberant long golden hair. In the mythical narrative, she's also mentioned as being the wife of Bragi, the court poet of Asgard. However, beyond her personal attributes, it was latent power she held that is arguably more interesting to the myth lovers. To that end, Idun was said to possess fruits, epli, sometimes designated as apples, that endow immortality, as mentioned in both Hauslong and the prose Ida. In essence, her fruits are the fuel that sustain the immortality of the Asgard dwellers, thereby making her a crucial member among the Norse gods. Another vague myth also relates to how she is accused of cheating by none other than Loki. We don't know the outcome of such allegations given the scarcity of sources. Loki, the trickster god. Represented as having qualities somewhat akin to the chaotic and mischievous aspects of ancient Egyptian god Set, Loki is regarded as the trickster among the Norse gods, who is a Jotun, being the son of giant Farboti and giantess or goddess Laufey. Also possesses the power to shapeshift. Essentially, he is projected as an entity who is not entirely evil in his whimsical purposes, and yet particularly scheming in his cruel actions, many of which led to misfortunes and even tragedies like the accidental death of Balder. Now, given his heritage as an outsider among the Aesir tribe of gods, the narrative of Loki in ancient stories might have served as a plot device that provides a soft antithesis to the other gods. His complex relationship with other gods, particularly Thor, comes to light from different sources. For example, in Lokasenna, Loki's Quarrel, one of the poems from the poetic Edda, Loki keeps on insulting Thor and then goes into hiding, fearing the hammer Mjolnir. On the other hand, in Prince Skivida, or anglicised Thrimskivida. Oh, so maybe I'm saying that wrong. Thor and Loki share their camaraderie when together they hatch a plan to retrieve the stolen Mjolnir from a Jotun named Premier. However, in spite of Loki's complicated character and narrative, he is foretold to be responsible for the deaths of many Norse gods during Ragnarok. For example, Loki's son, Fenrir the wolf, will kill Odin, while his other offspring, Jormungandr, the serpent, will poison Thor. That would ultimately lead to the thunder god's demise. Hell, the ruler of the Underworld. We tend to associate Hell with the realm of eternal damnation. Well, its Germanic counterpart was no walk in the park either, with inhabitants like Fenrir the wolf, Jormungandr the serpent, and other subjects who had died through sickness and old age. The ruler of this netherworld, also called Helm, was the eponymous Hel, who was the daughter of Loki and the giant Angerboda, and it fell upon her to judge and decide the fate of souls who entered the realm. Descriptions of Hel, the being, have found in numerous Viking sagas and poems, and most of them portray her as being partly decomposed with a face and a body of a living woman, albeit with a gloomy downcast appearance, but with thighs and legs of a corpse. Still, among the Norse goddesses, she is said to be the most powerful, even more than Odin himself, inside her own realm, the Hel. The tragic episode of Balder's death confirms such an association to power, since it ultimately falls upon Hel to decide the fate of the soul of a god who was considered the wisest and most pure of the Norse gods of Aesir. Hendell, the vigilant guardian of Asgard. Often portrayed as ever-vigilant guardian of Asgard, the stronghold of the Aesir Norse gods, Hendell, was hailed as the descendant of the giant Fornjot and the grandson of Sea Jotun Aegir. He is often depicted with his horn, Gjallarhorn, resounding horn, which is put to use when intruders approach the home of the Aesir tribe of gods. Pertaining to his guarding duty, Hendell is attested to possess keen eyesight that stretches to hundreds of miles, and hearing that even encompasses the sound of wool growing on the sheep, complemented by other qualities like having foreknowledge and vast sources of energy that allows him to sleep less than a bird. Interestingly enough, there is the possibility that Hendell was once considered to be the father of humankind, as vaguely mentioned in the Old Norse poem Voluspa. Other scholars have hypothesized that Hendell as a figurehead was historically perceived by the Norse tribes as being responsible for creating the hierarchy and classes among men. In any case, reverting to mythology, Hendell also plays an important role in the impending Ragnarok, where he will sound the call of the Gjallarhorn to signal the arrival of the giants and monsters, and in the consequent confrontations, Loki and Hendell are foretold to slay one another. Njord, the god of seas and wealth. Njord belonged to the Vanir branch of Norse gods, but was later accepted as an honorary member of the Aesir after the inclusion of their war. In the mythical narrative, Njord was the god of the sea, while also being associated with both wealth and fertility. Suffice to say, given his powers, the Vikings especially revered him as the principal deity of seafaring. Germanic people may also have perceived him as the richest divine being among all the Norse gods and goddesses. As for the primary myth of Njord, the lore relates to the marriage of the sea god with the giantess Skadi. Interestingly enough, Skadi marries Njord after being enticed by his beautiful feet, which he mistakenly identified as that of Baldur, the Norse god of youth. However, domestic life was not that blissful for the unlikely couple, with Skadi preferring to spend time in her home in the snowy mountains, while Njord preferring it at the Noten, the place of ships, in his heavenly abode. Expectedly, the couple part ways after some time, but not before giving birth to the twins Freyr and Freya, two major Norse deities in their own right. Freyr, the god of fertility. One of the most venerated and beloved of the Norse gods, Freyr, along with his twin sister Freya, was unique in his origins, since he belonged to the Vanir Norse gods, as opposed to the Aesir. Usually depicted as a brawny man with flowing hair, Freyr, the son of sea god Njord and frost giantess Skadi, or Njord's unnamed sister, was hailed as the foremost of deities when it came to the aspect of fertility, covering both sexual and ecological scopes. Simply put, the god embodied bountiful harvests, wealth, peace, and possibly even virility, all symbolized by Freyr's boar, Gullinborsti, golden bristled. Given his association with such important avenues, Freyr was the favourite entity of reverence and worship when it came to marriage rites and harvest celebrations. The preferred sacrifice in these cases often involved the boar, the animal symbolically linked to the fertility god. In that regard, in Norse mythology, Freyr was also known to travel in his chariot pulled by boars, and was enacted by ancient historical possessions of Germanic priests who went around in chariots containing Freyr's statue to typify the coming of peace and prosperity in various regions of Germania. Interestingly enough, Freyr was also associated with the elves, since his residence pertained to the Alfheim, the homeland of the elves. In that regard, some scholars have hypothesized that Freyr was possibly even regarded as the king of elves with immense riches, although some conjecture is not well established in the Norse lore and actual history sources. Moreover, Freyr also boasted his ship, Skidbladnir, which had the enviable capacity to always have a favourable wind, while also showcasing its modular design that allowed the craft to be folded into a tiny package. And finally, Freya, the goddess of fate and destiny. Freya, meaning lady, though initially belonging to the Vanir tribe of Norse gods, like her twin brother Freyr, was also a loyal and honorary member of the Aesir after the conclusion of their tribal war. Epitomizing the aspects of love, beauty, and even opulent objects, the goddess was often represented as the seeker of pleasure and unknown. Focusing on the latter, Freya embodied the vulva, or anglicized valva, the female seer of the Norse religion, who had the ability to tinker with the cedar, magic pertaining to destiny and its weaving. In essence, Freya had the ability to alter and manipulate one's desire and fortune, and thus was often associated with the undiscernible attitude of cats. Freya was also regarded among the Norse goddesses as the ruler of the afterlife realm, Folkvang, which allowed her to choose half of the warriors who were slain in the battle. The other half were guided by the Valkyries to Valhalla. All these characteristics of a potent vulva mirrors the historical scenario of the Germanic pantheon, especially the Volkerwanderung, or migration period circa 400 to 800 AD. In that regard, these tribal societies tended to favour two gods at the head of their pantheon, symbolising the chieftain warrior, who would lead them into battles and plunders, and his wife, the Prophetess, who would outline the future outcome of such military encounters by her magic. Many historians and scholars believe that these two figures eventually coalesced into what we know as the Norse entities of Odin and Freyk, with the latter being the same, or at least sharing similar qualities to the deity who was regarded as Freya. To that end, Freya's husband is often identified as Oder, roughly meaning furor or ecstasy, and Odin is just the word Oder with the masculine definite article added to the end. So there is a diagram of the Norse god family tree with a lot of, I think it would be too confusing for me to go over it because it's a diagram, so it's got the lines connected to which descendant comes from where, because some kind of overlap and skip, and it's kind of odd. So what I will do is I will just link so you can go and have a little look. I'll put it on the screen as well. It's a nice little diagram with cute illustrations. But yeah, so it's very interesting. I'm sorry if I completely butchered the language, the names. It's a very unique language and I'm not used to it, so I tried my best. I hope that you enjoyed it. If you like this kind of thing, please let me know. I know that you like the Celtic mythology, so that obviously encompasses a lot of different lands, and Norse mythology obviously covers quite a few different countries too. So yeah, let me know if you like this, if you'd like to see more. Thank you very much for listening, and I'll see you again really, really soon. Bye bye.